This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Windmedjes.
Hi, this is Mark Snow, composer for The X-Files, and you are listening to the fabulous X-Cast.
Welcome to the X-Cast, The Truth is in Here. My name is Clara Cook and I'm your host for today. This is our Patrons Roundtable today. I'm here with Michelle Milbauer. Hello, Michelle. And I'm also here with Marlene Stemme.
Hi.
So today the subject is the music of the X-Files, and this is an exciting subject, partly because the music of the X-Files is so intrinsically linked with the show itself. You can't hear that theme tune, Mark Snow's theme tune, without thinking of the X-Files. It's such a famous theme tune that it's now become a meme on the internet, and it's one of those tunes that is just basically completely and utterly linked with the actual show. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about, is the theme tune, but we're also going to be talking about all the incidental music in the X-Files as well. So just a little bit of background. The majority of the music for the X-Files was written and composed by Mark Snow. He composed music for both the X-Files and Millennium, so that's the sort of brother show, sister show to the X-Files. He wrote scores for the shows, but also for the two X-Files films. He heavily uses synthesizers when composing the music, and he gives the show a sort of atmospheric, ambient sound. So sometimes it is quite tuneful, other times it's actually just sounds in the background to emphasize the action or to give certain episodes more of a spooky feel. And as the series went on, he developed the music so that there were more melodies and actually even vocals. So later in the series, there are some vocals, especially surrounding Scully and action to do with Scully. Chris Carter normally chose the popular music for the show, so that would be the music that's like sung by different artists and has lyrics and stuff. But the majority of the actual instrumental music was composed and written and even performed by Mark Snow. So the first thing on the agenda is to talk about the title theme tune, the famous theme tune, which I won't sing because I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do it. But you are welcome to sing it if you want to.
Oh, I wouldn't subject anybody to that.
Okay. So, Michelle, I'll start with you. What did you first think of the theme tune when you first heard it?
It's almost hard to even dissociate it from the show at this point. So now, being so familiar with the show, it's kind of hard to remember what it sounded like when it was new. The only way I can describe it is iconic, and it's right up there, in my opinion, with other famous or infamous theme songs. I mean, you think The Twilight Zone, immediately that song pops into your head. MASH, Cheers, any number of other just iconic TV show theme songs, and I can't imagine at this point anything else opening the show. It's one of those things from interviews that I've heard with Mark Snow. It was sort of a happy accident how it fell together, and it just couldn't be more perfect in my opinion, with that spooky, no pun intended, sound. Just like the show. The show is nothing. There's nothing else like the show, though things have tried recently, and there's nothing else like that song, and they just seem to fit perfectly together, in my opinion.
Marlene, what about you? I mean, the theme tune is performed in like a minor key, which makes it sound very spooky. And if you actually hear it performed in a major key, it actually sounds like kind of a happy little tune. It doesn't sound that spooky.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre in major key.
So, Marlene, what did you think of the theme tune?
Well, I agree with Michelle about it being iconic and sort of always being necessary to set up the show. I think it's interesting that it is in a minor key because there is that sort of note of whimsy to it as well. that's not as dark as it would otherwise be, I think. And I actually remember, in fact, sitting here thinking about it, I can remember where I was sitting in my friend's apartment when I first watched the show, and the episode was Too Shy. And I remember the theme coming on and just being sort of curious and intrigued by the sounds of it and how ambient it was. And it just didn't sound like something that was going to be very, like, fast-paced and action and trying to get your attention. It was much more absorbing than that. And I, in particular, enjoy that. So I remember that. I remember the sounds, and I remember the imagery of the introductory credits with that theme song going on. And like I said, I can still sort of remember that, and then like all of the photos flashing by and all of the images. Whenever I hear it, if I really think about it, I can kind of go back to that very first viewing. And I like that it does that after all these like multiplicitous rewatches and episodes that have gone by. I still have that sense of what it was like when it was new to me, at least.
It's quite unique as a theme tune because a lot of TV shows have an original theme tune, and then as the series goes on, they update it. Like, a typical thing that TV shows do is they add like a beat, you know? So you have like the sort of instrumental music of an original, the series 1 or series 2, and then by the time you get to series 9, the theme tune has a beat, and it's more kind of poppy or electronic or something. But the X-Files hasn't done that. They've kept the same theme tune, and even in like season 10 and 11, still the same theme tune, and it's very nostalgic in a way. It's kind of takes, like you said, it takes you back to your first watching of it.
I like that they haven't updated it as well, because I like that they didn't try to keep up with the times in that way, and I think that's made it more timeless and just kind of kept it. It's simple without being simplistic, you know, and I think that that's what makes it sort of have lasted this entire time.
So, Michelle, it's actually quite a like electronic type theme tune, isn't it? So it's not something with an orchestra. It's not like a big kind of melodic sort of orchestral type of piece of music. Do you think that sort of dates it in a way, like as in makes you think of the 90s more than any other period?
No, I don't find that the theme itself is dated so much as, you know, our nostalgia for it is dated. Like, yes, it was 1993. So as Marlene said, it does take you back to 1993. And while there's some things about 1993 I'd be really happy to go back to, there's other stuff that, no thanks. But no, I think had they tried, as you said, had they tried to make it trendy and kind of keep up with the times, I think that would have made it worse. And as much as what changed with everything involved with the show, even through the first 9 seasons, not even, you know, almost everything changed for 10 and 11, having that stay the same felt right. It would have been really awkward to me, I think, if they had tried to, you know, 2016 up that theme song. I'm not even sure how you would have done it. I don't know, bring Justin Bieber in or something. I don't know.
Put lyrics to it.
Ooh. Yeah, really. I can't even fathom what that would be. Although I'm sure if we look hard enough on the internet, we could find some. No, I don't know. To me, I don't think it's dated. I think there's the nostalgia for it. This nostalgia, by definition, is dated because it's taking you back. But no, I once again, just iconic. As soon as you hear that first bit of it, you know exactly what it is and where it came from, and so no, dated isn't a word I would use to describe it.
I like, if I can add this, I like some of the variations they've done through the years, but I also like that they never replaced the original with that. Whether it was something they had done for one of the movies or something another artist had done or a dance remix or something like that. I enjoy how that's expressed in some of those different variations, but I like that they never really adopted anything different as their main theme.
I don't know, I mean, I know this is not how it was written, but I always imagined that Mark Snow had been put in a cupboard, like locked in a cupboard by Chris Carter with a keyboard for like a week, and then when he came out, it was like do 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 do. I said I wouldn't sing, but I am singing. That's just how I imagined it happening. I can
imagine a lot of locked cupboards on the show, though.
Locking the writers in
right,
the room,
right.
making them, yeah, exactly. So the other music, the incidental music, I say incidental, the background music, like in most of the series, and if we're going to like sort of look at the series chronologically, like from season 1 to season 9, because there is a marked difference between those seasons and season 10 and 11. I think in season 10 and 11 there is wouldn't say more popular music, but there is more music with lyrics, and also it feels more orchestral to me. I think it feels like more louder, bombastic type of background music. So seasons 1 to 9, there's a lot of sort of electronic type of music, synthesizers, it's almost like background sort of staticky type noise, like a strange synthetic violin sound, especially when stuff like music like Tombs. And one of my favorite pieces of music in the series is sort of sounds is the background sort of soundtrack of Tombs, the sort of dribbling kind of, what is it, like plucking of strings almost? It's like that.
It's something, that creepy crawly kind of
Yeah, you get a lot of that creepy crawly stuff. I distinctly remember that being in Darkness Falls.
With
the swarms and yeah.
So, Marlene, do you have a particular favourite background type of music that takes place in seasons 1 to 9? Or
I like the mood of the creepy crawly music. I like all of the things that are like more, I guess, like tonal or mood based like that. Not tonal musically, but tonal in terms of the content of the show. And sort of mood based. So I was thinking of those examples from Squeeze and Tombs. I also, how far are we going to season 1? Or
well, I mean, season 1. Basically, the music from season 1 to season 5 is much more just Mark Snow, kind of on his own. Lots of, I mean, they did use different instruments and stuff, but it's much less orchestral. And then obviously the film hits, the first film, Fight the Future, and then things become. The soundtrack and the background music becomes much more melodic and tuneful. And by the time you end up with season 9, you have vocals for like Scully's themes, for instance.
Okay, so just earlier. So in addition to Squeeze and Tombs, I made a note about, there's something I think it's at the end of Our Town. There's like a like wind instruments and percussion in the scene when Mulder, I think, is running to the site of the barbecue, if you will. I just remember that it's not in the same sort of like sinister, creepy, crawly sense as Tombs, but it's still that atmospheric music. And then there's a part in Humbug when Mulder, maybe it's the running scenes that I'm thinking of, but it's another scene when he's running and he's going by the river. And I want to say it's piano as well, but it's just that sort of, it's whimsical again without being super odd, which plays against the oddity in the episode without overdoing it. And I remember really liking the way that was done. There was just a lot of like music that was sort of complementary to the action. It wasn't just background music to stuff it in there. So that's not exactly the same thing as like the creepy crawly stuff, but I think that it's also just goes with the moods of the scenes. And so that tends to be the type of thing that I like. And then I also, there's one that's a little bit later, I don't know if it's going too far, but I watched Paper Hearts the other night, and all of the sort of plucky, fun music with the red dot and the dream sequence, I thought it was that playful edge to a very dark episode, and I liked the way that was done too. And I remember at the time thinking that sounded like the music that would be in a children's story, like the Alice in Wonderland theme and that. And so that was one of my sort of favorite early to mid-year examples.
Yeah, I thought the same thing about Paper Hearts. That red dot, the music when that red dot is moving around, is almost like the music that you would get like in a little nursery rhyme or something. Like a little tune that you would get in like you say, a children's story or cartoon. Michelle, is there any particular like favourite music that you have or that really struck a chord with you when you were watching the series?
Yeah, again, Paper Hearts is one that stands out because of, as has been said, the playful nature of it, the kind of follow me, and yet you're still kind of, it's a little bit discordant, I suppose, in that you're like, this playful music, I want to follow this, but in the back of your mind, this doesn't lead anywhere good. So it's that dichotomy. And a lot of the chase scenes, the almost thriller kind of, not thriller Michael Jackson, but thriller music, just the way the excitement and the energy of that music sort of pulls you into those scenes, pulls you to the edge of your seat, like, oh my, no matter how many times you've seen it, you know what happens, and yet you're still there on edge, like waiting for that next bit or waiting for them to round the corner. So, just a lot of throughout the entire series, really, and he goes back to a lot of the same themes throughout all of the first 9 seasons, anyway, you find. So a lot of that stuff, I'll find myself listening and racking my brain, trying to remember, okay, I know I've heard that before. Which episode was that in previously? I think I like a lot of thriller, edge of your seat kind of draw you into the action.
Yeah, and a lot of the music I found, especially the earlier seasons, I found like you're right about the discordant element of it. So it sort of sounds like a tune that's being slightly played out of tune, or there's a sort of little tune and then it changes very suddenly, and it's kind of sort of to make things seem weird and strange, which is kind of what goes with the X-Files.
Yeah.
Right.
Offsettling, yeah.
I think I like that it's a little bit surreal, but it still keeps us in the real world with Mulder and Scully. So it's not so sci-fi and going like off into another realm, but it is that like little edge that something's not quite what it seems.
So have either of you ever tried watching the X-Files with your fingers in your ears? I mean, I know obviously you wouldn't be able to hear what Mulder and Scully's saying, but actually if you're watching a scene that doesn't have any dialogue and you put your fingers in your ears, it's very different without the music. So the music, even though you might not necessarily always notice it, although it sounds like the two of you do notice it, but for viewers that aren't always noticing the music, if you put your fingers in your ears, it actually is a lot less frightening or a lot less unsettling. Like definitely Tombs would be quite different without that dribbling sound. So the music to the X-Files, it's so ingrained in the actual show that it's so integral to the show. It's as integral as actually the actors acting or the lack of light.
Yeah, right.
You know, the dark scenes. And that's one of the things I thought was really interesting about the show is when I was researching for this podcast, I did try watching some scenes without listening to the music, and it was a completely different experience. What about the ethnic
I remember, sorry, can I say one thing about that this reminded me of? I remember, so I started watching in season 3, as I said, and I remember when Talitha Kumi came on, I was in college, I had a lot of people over to my apartment to watch it, and some of them have been watching longer than I had, but I was riveted because I had never seen a season finale before and so forth. And I remember the scene when Mulder is searching through the house. I had a question about something that tied into the past that I hadn't yet seen on the series, and so I asked this question, and somebody called me out for talking during the mood music. Like, you don't do that. Because it's interrupting the flow, even though no one's saying anything, and it's a fairly straightforward scene. It's like, you don't talk during the mood music. Right.
Oh, that's funny. It does make a difference, though, doesn't it? I suppose you're, like, into it, you know, you're in the mood there, you're in the X-Files, and then... But the thing is, I think as the series goes on, the music does change, and you do find by like season 9, I felt like almost in a weird way it sort of becomes more spiritual, like Scully's theme, which is actually vocals singing "We Are Near" over and over and over again, but kind of distorted. And I did not know that until I actually read about it, and then I listened to it, and I was like, oh my god, they are singing "We Are Near." So the music does actually change throughout the series, and then obviously later on. Well, we'll go on to talk about season 10 and 11. But before we do, I just need to know what your opinions are about the ethnic panpipes.
Do you want to go first, Michelle? I don't know.
Yeah, Michelle.
That's when it gets problematic.
I hate those panpipes.
I recently did recorded an episode of the X-Cast discussing Teleco.
Oh, okay.
And we were talking in that discussion about how it felt like the ethnic music was turned up to like 14. You know, at certain points it's okay, but then it just goes way over the top, and it takes you out of it. And, you know, even with a lot of the Native American, or the attempts at Native American style music in those episodes, even with El Mundo Gira, I mean, there's so many where the attempts were made, and I guess you have to applaud the effort, though they were sort of painful to watch and listen to then, and they certainly have not aged well. So yeah, in my opinion, the attempts at some of the ethnic stuff, some fared better than others, but a lot of times it was pushed too far to the foreground to the point where it was distracting. Just a lot. Like, dial that back. 14 is too much.
What did you think, Marlene?
So, I agree with what you're saying intellectually. I think you're right. But I can't help myself. I guess I didn't take it that seriously until I heard people commenting on it. I mean, I knew in a way that it was sort of, I don't want to say wrong, but, you know, maybe insensitive. But I just didn't think that it was meant as seriously as it's taken, maybe.
That's
and I don't
for
know.
sure.
I don't know if that's the appropriate way to see it, but I still, like, to me, it's, I don't know. I found it entertaining, and I don't mean that in the sense of, like, entertaining that we are putting this sound upon these people whose story we're watching or whatever. I don't know. I guess I just thought of it as, like, maybe I just wasn't aware. I didn't think of it as being anything other than, like, a moody sound, I guess. But I mean, I see the patterns and all of that. So like I said, I know what you're saying, but when I hear it, I kind of find it funny. So
yeah, I find it funny now. I think it's not just the panpipes. It's every once in a while there's a wailing woman. There's like a wail from a woman's voice, and especially the episode about voodoo. Which is the episode about voodoo? The one where Fresh Bones, yeah. And I'm pretty sure there's a wailing woman in Fresh Bones. And that just, I mean, if you ever want any film, any TV show in existence out there, when you want something spooky and sort of ethnic sounding, there's always a wailing woman. Do you know what I mean? It's like the wailing woman starts up. And I feel that's kind of sloppy, kind of like, it's kind of a cheat, really.
Yeah, I agree. I
understand they were trying to do anything, I suppose.
Yeah. I guess with the ethnic hornpipe, I never thought of it necessarily as just an ethnic hornpipe, but there are always those, like, I thought there were hornpipe sounds or just sounds that would be made whenever we were supposed to think something was some big discovery or revelation that wasn't really a big discovery or revelation. And so you'd hear that, like, gong, gong, whatever the hornpipe sound, I can't do the hornpipe sound, but whatever it was at one of those times. And it's like, to me, it was sort of like the gong sound at the end of Fire, which I just think is hysterical, and it's not,
there is a gong,
great.
Though, isn't there?
Yes,
Like
that's the worst example in the whole world, but I think it makes it funny because it's supposed to be this grand ending, and it's really not. So to me, I think it was amusing because of that, not necessarily because it represented anything culturally, because I can certainly see the issues with that.
It's also a similar gong sound that you hear in like TV series like Law and Order when there's a scene change. It's like gong gong. I was always like, why are they doing? I wonder how they make that sound with a giant cowbell and a hammer. I mean,
maybe.
So if we're going to go on into the later series, so like series 8 and series 9, and especially when Mulder is now no longer there in series 9. I always forget which series he leaves in. And they're in spirit, I suppose, but not there in body. There's a lot more music centered around Scully. And so this is when Scully's theme comes in, and it's like I say, the vocals, and that was actually also written by Mark Snow. Michelle, what do you think of Scully's theme?
I like Scully's theme. I find it to be haunting, which in my opinion is the point, and mournful. And I believe it first shows up in Within, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I that piece of music, personally, I really do enjoy. I think they may have gotten a little heavy-handed with it, and reused it too much, but the first few times it was used, and even later on when it was used, I found it to be, as I said, haunting and mournful. You can almost feel her pain. I believe they use it was it later in Within, when she's in his apartment before Doggett comes in, when she's asleep on his bed holding his shirt. I found that to be a really effective scene, and so I enjoy Scully's theme.
Do you think it was a good idea to introduce vocals as well, like into more, because I hadn't really used vocals before in X-Files?
No. I think it works, especially in the context of, I always thought it was He Is Near, but I never, I guess did enough research to find out that it was not that. But either way, it's fitting, I think, considering the circumstances.
Really, yeah.
So yeah, it was a big change by way of vocals being added to what was normally or previously electronic music for the most part. But as I said, I think it was fitting. I enjoyed it.
What about you, Marlene?
I have a mixed opinion on it now. At the time when season 8 was on, I thought it was very overwrought, and it kind of sort of like, for part of what Michelle said, like a little bit overused at times. It's like whenever Scully seemed mournful, because I agree it was very mournful and it was haunting, but it's like you're supposed to think Scully is mournful, and that comes across in Gillian Anderson's performance, but then no, we have to layer this music on top of it so that we know that Scully is mournful. That's kind of how I perceived it at the time, is it seemed a little bit heavily laid on, a little bit of melodrama, but I guess that was also my opinion of what was going on in season 8 as well. Looking back though, and then like once I read the "We Are Near" part. I like that. I like that part of the vocalization. I think it's very spiritual. But the wailing part, I just can't take it. I still just do not like it. I think that like, I don't know, it ties into some other things I don't like about that season in terms of how Scully is written. And it's not that I have some issue with it, it's just not my preference. And so I really don't like that side of the music, but I like the "We Are Near" part. And I like the way that the theme was woven into the theme from "This Is Not Happening" when they did that later on in the season. Because I really remember liking that music, which was, what I'm talking about is the music at the end of "This Is Not Happening" when Scully is running back to like the, not campsite, but to find Jeremiah Smith. And then I think it was later on, a few episodes later maybe, that they kind of wove those two together. And I thought that was very effective because they kind of felt like they sort of like modified each other nicely maybe. I don't know. So I still clearly mixed opinion on it.
It is kind of overwhelming. In fact, I originally thought it was sort of semi-connected to the music that was playing in Closure. You know, the sort of background, the distorted, repeated voices of children in Closure when Mulder finally sees the ghost of Samantha. I thought it was linked to that. I thought they started using vocals just generally, but actually that's a song.
That's part of
it. That was written by Moby.
That was Moby, yeah.
Yeah. But at the time, I was like, oh, they're using women's vocals now after having used a children's choir or something. Yeah, I agree with you. Sometimes it is overwhelming. I think it distracts from what I'm seeing on screen, and I felt like it was kind of new agey. And this is really only my preference and my prejudice, but I never liked the X-Files when it got too spiritual for me. I mean, I'm not like anti-religion or anything, just to emphasize that to the whole like X-Cast community. but careful, you're being recorded. But it's more that I just wasn't as interested in the whole sort of mysticism surrounding a lot of the stuff that took place in the X-Files, and I understand that obviously the spirituality is a big theme in the X-Files, so I mean, it's interesting for a lot of people, but it sort of sounded like new agey for me, and I think I also didn't really like the use of Moby in the X-Files because it also sounded new agey. But before we get on to talking about popular music, which we really will very shortly, what about seasons 10 and 11? Because I found some of the music in seasons 10 and 11 a little bit distracting. Like, some of the action scenes, the music seems less... it's definitely less electronic. It's a lot more instruments. I found it seemed like just a bit bombastic for me. I mean, Marlene, what did you think?
I agree with that. I've heard the comment that the music, or that the scenes were bombastic, and I think that music, whether it's supposed to make you feel bombastic or not, or that was the intent of the scene, I agree that it was, for me, it was a little too much that way. I also, aside from that, like that, when people say things about it being bombastic and so forth, it reminds me of watching it. And I mean, I've seen those episodes, many of them, as many times as I've seen some of the original ones now, but I don't remember the music, or I don't feel that call back to the episodes and to the mood of what's going on when I would hear the music the way I would with the original series. So to me, the music itself, or the score, isn't as memorable. I remember something that Mark Snow said in a podcast about how the mix was done and whether or not that was to his liking, and I don't really know how those things work in terms of the composition versus how that's mixed in. I mean, I get that the mix is put in with all of the other, the action and the sounds and the dialogue and so forth, but I don't know if that was the issue or if it was just the way that it went with the scenes, or as you said, it being more orchestral. I just don't find it to be that... it wasn't as integral, I guess. Like, it did seem like it was just something that was stuck on there. That sounds really negative, and I don't mean for it to be, because I don't feel like it necessarily detracted from my appreciation of the scenes overall. But I guess in some of the episodes, like I remember in this, there was more action music because it was more of a sort of on-the-run thriller, and that seemed fitting. And then I do remember in the scene of Mulder talking to Erica Price, that there was some sort of like slower, more ambient, sinister music that I thought worked very well and was more absorbing. But no, overall, I would say that the score doesn't have the same effect that it did in the original series.
What about you, Michelle? What did you think of the music of 10 and 11?
It seems to be almost, I'm not even sure how to put it, not unmemorable, really. I don't, as far as the original music from those 2 seasons go, I can't really think of anything specific that I can say, oh, I really liked that piece of music. But conversely, I can't pinpoint anything that I could say, oh, I really disliked that piece of music. It was just sort of there, for lack of a better way of putting it. Just unmemorable. Definitely not, to me, as noticeable, not as nothing really stood out to me.
I did make a note here, I see, that I like some of the music at the ends of some of the earlier episodes of season 11. Like, I went back through and watched the ending of The Lost Art of Forehead Sweat and of Ghoulie, and there's sort of like a lightness of tone that I liked about that, and I thought it really suited what was going on in the episode. I do think that was different than the way that those things were constructed in the first 9 seasons, but I thought it was very effective, and I thought it kind of went with, I don't know, I think that some of the Mulder and Scully aspects of those early episodes, not the first episode necessarily, but the other 4, had a lightness to them, and I thought that music really went well with it. But that, again, is in moments. It wasn't necessarily the whole episode. It was just like an ending tone, that was put onto that I thought was very effective.
So one of the things that I noticed about season 10 and 11 is the use of popular music. So popular music is used throughout the X-Files, although not as much as in other television programs. So that's worth noting that other television programs have a lot more recognizable background pop music, rock music, popular music, basically music that's sung by artists, has lyrics, that kind of thing. And I thought the X-Files was unique in that way, which is, maybe it was just my musical knowledge, but when I was first watching the series when I was younger in the 90s, I don't remember a lot of the songs being memorable, like recognizable to me. So, say for instance, Nick Cave's, the Red Right Hand song that's played in Ascension. Thank God Dwayne Barry doesn't sing it; he plays it on the radio. I didn't know that song as a child. So when I was first watching the X-Files, I associated that song with like Dwayne Barry and American radio and Scully being abducted. And when I saw that song in a different TV show like a couple of years ago, I was like, what? No, this is an X-Files song, It was Peaky Blinders. It was in Peaky Blinders. And I was like, what? No. So I think the original series, series 1 to 9, like the older series, they do use popular music that's perhaps maybe not as mainstream, whereas season 10 and 11, it was a lot more mainstream. So the person who was the music supervisor in those seasons was a woman called Trisha Halloran, and she secured some of the songs that were played in the series, and that included stuff like Petula Clark's Downtown, which is played in Home Again, and the sort of country music mishmash that was in Babylon when Mulder was high on drugs, and then also sort of like Ho Hey by the Lumineers, which I just really struggled with because I knew that song already before I've been to weddings, and that's the song that's always played at weddings.
Right.
So, Michelle, what did you think of the popular music like in seasons like 10 and 11?
I think it was, my poster in the back, I think it was well done in this, the use of the Ramones.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very well done. I think I'm one of the few that I think actually somewhat enjoyed Home Again. It wasn't without its problems, obviously, but I thought it was a well-done episode. But the use of Downtown in that episode seemed like a somewhat less successful attempt to get back to what was done in Home. And that just discordant weirdness of, it just... to try and call back, it wasn't as well done, or it felt shoehorned in, whereas Wonderful, Wonderful and Home really just sort of creeped you out. I mean, Wonderful, Wonderful was a song that I was familiar with, but didn't really have any association with it, before my time, and I mean, same thing with Downtown. It to me felt a little heavy-handed, and we're going to try and... This isn't Home again, in that we're not going back to the Peacock family, which is still kind of a bummer, because they were...
Where are they now?
Horrifying and awesome all at the same time. So that callback wasn't as successful, in my opinion. But, yeah, I mean, as problematic as Babylon was, didn't ruin the Lumineers for me. And that song comes on the radio, and, I'm a shipper. So Mulder and Scully then pop into my brain, because that's how I'm wired. I might have a few wires loose. But, yeah, I mean, there were hits and misses. But I think overall, the popular music in the X-Files as a whole kind of worked for me. Now, had they used, pop music of the week, and it showed up more often, I think it would have been less effective. But when things showed up, I think for the most part they were well done. They didn't feel too out of place, I guess.
It does feel very much like the popular music in the X-Files is deliberate stylistic choice. So when they play something like Wonderful, Wonderful, and they couple it, like this very romantic song, they couple it with something that's ugly and awful, or like the Ramones in this, that seemed like a very deliberate, sort of fun, stylistic choice. I mean, Marlene, what did you think? Do you think the popular music is something that they very carefully pick the right song for the right scene?
Overall, I would say they did. I certainly think they did in the first 9 seasons. If we're going through the whole thing, I think that what you said about the sort of more, I don't know if alternative, like songs that are not so much in the mainstream, the use of those songs I thought was really effective, like Red Right Hand or Unmarked Helicopters, things like that. And I like sort of what I think of as like sort of the Glenn Morgan tradition of putting a popular song, like juxtaposing that with the content of what's going on in the episode. I totally agree with what Michelle said about it being shoehorned in Home Again. I really thought that as well. It's like, yeah, this is fun, but it's kind of like, I felt like it took me out of the episode, because it's almost like you can sort of see them planning to put that song into the episode. But aside from that, I thought that like the Ramones' California Sun was great. I really like the way that Teach Your Children was put into Followers, because I liked that it wove together the sort of separate Mulder and Scully, like the opposite homes and everything that was sort of going on that was in parallel between them. And I like the way that it went from being kind of ambient music to music that the characters are actually hearing that's playing as source music in the episode. I thought that was very well done, and it made the whole thing a little more sort of like a dream, or a little more surreal, which I liked too. So I thought that was well done, and that was sort of another Glenn Morgan-ish thing to do. Are we going to talk about the Cher in the Postmodern Prometheus?
Yeah.
I think that's a big... I felt like that was a big sort of first for a lot of things that Chris Carter did, and I thought that it was very successful the way he used those songs in that episode. I'm not sure that the way that it's done in some of his later efforts was equally well realized, but I think that it was bold. And I think in that episode it worked very, very well and was fun. So
the story about that originally is that Cher was they asked Cher to come on the show, and she didn't want to go on the show for some really tiny little part, but she said that you can use my music. But then once she saw the episode afterwards, she was like, I should have done it.
Why didn't I?
Yeah, why didn't I? Which, it's nice of her to admit that, but she was like, I should have done it. That would have been a great part. Because she didn't want to play herself. She didn't mind playing somebody else.
Oh, okay.
She was kind of bored at the idea of playing herself. But yeah, that's a very good part of the series, actually. That's a very good use of music in that particular episode. Partly because it's not just background popular music or popular music being used in a set scene. It's that it's supposed to deliberately be Cher. Mm-hmm. Like, he's listening to Cher because they're going to see Cher, because I want to say the monster. The monster's the
boy,
poor unfortunate
love Cher.
Special boy.
The great mutato.
That's it.
The great mutato. It's his interest is in Cher, so it's an example of somebody's interest in popular music, which you don't see much in the X-Files. I mean, Michelle, did you think that Cher worked in that episode?
Yes, I do. And I had also read the statement about Cher not wanting to do it and then wishing that she had. So that would have been interesting had we had more than a Cher impersonator. Although, can't exactly make the end of the episode a Cher concert, but, that just, the costuming alone would have just been amazing. On a separate note, going back to songs that I hadn't really had any familiarity with, there's the episode, and I'm going to butcher the name of it, Orison? When Donnie Pfaster comes back.
Yeah.
Orison,
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
The song that's used there, I had never...
Don't look any further. Yeah.
I didn't... It wasn't a song I was familiar with, so I started looking into it, and it turns out that at a point in the episode, Scully says to Mulder, "Do you hear that?" Because she hears the song again. And he's like, "Well, barely." And she says to him, "I haven't heard this song since high school, and I've heard it twice in the last 20 minutes. The song was released in April of 1984. Scully was supposedly born in 1964. That makes Scully in high school at 20. Dr. Scully spent a long time in high school, I guess.
Which is odd for someone so smart.
Just really.
Yeah, exactly.
She liked it so much, decided to hang out a little longer or something. I don't know. That's just the way my, strange brain works sometimes, I guess. So that part struck me as funny. But honestly, I had no idea that was a real, actual song. And the song itself is kind of cheesy and odd, and the lyrics kind of ooged me out. So I don't know if I'll listen to that part of that episode the same ever again. Not that that's the most problematic part of that episode, but that song's kind of problematic now. Sure, it was problematic then.
Yep.
That's another example of somebody deliberately listening to music, though. Mm-hmm. Because you don't see many examples in the X-Files of people actually deliberately listening to music.
And I actually have heard that on the radio, and turned it off when I was driving. I've heard it on the radio and and turned it off. And it reminds me a little bit, it's not as broadly known, but it reminds me a little bit of the way that American Girl was used in The Silence of the Lambs. And hearing that on the radio after I saw The Silence of the Lambs, I guess it was the same sort of idea of this popular song, that was just then extremely creepy because of the context.
So that's an example, I suppose, of how powerful the X-Files is as a TV show, that it's not just about popular music coming into the show, it's about the show leaving the show and going into the actual popular music, so that when you hear the song at a later date, you're like, I can't divorce my memory of this particular episode off from that song. I don't really want to listen to that song anymore because this is the episode where Scully shoots somebody in cold blood. But yeah, anyway, moving on from that.
Just I know this is completely off topic, but I watched that episode within the last few days, actually. And, Donnie Pfaster was, understatement of the century, a giant creep anyway, and he was creepy, but the violence of that episode is just astounding. That poor, I don't know if Gillian Anderson did it or if there was a stunt double that did it, but she is slammed into that mirror, and it was, I found myself cringing watching it. So, yeah, the music associated with that episode, everything with that, just kind of cringeworthy now.
It's pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
But then I also cringe a little bit when I hear Moby sometimes.
See, I had the opposite reaction to that. Hearing Moby
all these albums
in those two episodes. So did I. So, yeah, I bought the album Play by Moby because of those two episodes. Yeah.
So, speaking of albums, did you guys ever buy the album that came out in 1996 called Songs in the Key of X?
Yes.
Music from and inspired by the X-Files. Mm-hmm. So this is exciting because, I know TV shows do this now. Well, normally you'd stream stuff now, I suppose, or digital or whatever. But in the past, TV shows used to inspire albums rather than just it being music from the TV series. But I don't really remember it happening too much before this. This is quite early for an album of this kind. And so it actually sold really well. It did really, really well. It got mixed critical reviews, but it sold really well, partly because it was capitalising off the back of the X-Files, and some of it was actually inspired by the X-Files, and some of it was in the X-Files.
Mm-hmm. There was one, and I don't remember the name of the album. I'm sure if I dig through some of the boxes that are out in my garage, I could find the CD. Yes, CD, because I'm elderly. That had Mark Snow's music, and intercut with that, or overlaid with that, would be dialogue from the show. So there was one song, and you heard Scully's first attempt at hypnosis after her abduction experience. So that's the score, audio, I think, from the show, but it's blended with scenes that may or may not have corresponded to when that music was playing. Is that the one you're talking about? Yeah. Because I listened to that recently before this podcast, and I was like, that's cool, but it doesn't necessarily go together exactly. Yeah. So I had at least one CD of that. I know I bought the Fight the Future soundtrack. I bought the Fight the Future score. There were several musical tie-ins back in the day that I'm sure, like I said, if I dig around through some boxes in my garage, I can pull those out.
So, getting on to the movies now, Fight the Future was like the first example in the X-Files where an orchestra was used as part of the music, as part of the score, rather than just electronic instruments or a keyboard or that kind of thing. And so it's the actual music of Fight the Future, the movie, is a lot bigger. It has a bigger, more cinematic feel, but you're also keeping some of those musical cues that you get in the X-Files, like, you know, the beginning of the theme tune. I did like it, though. I didn't think it was ever too loud for too long. It doesn't distract from the action. I mean, Marlene, what did you think of the music of Fight the Future?
I like it. I appreciate it. I don't love it. I think it was well done. But to me, it's, I don't want to say standard because I'm not judging it in musical terms. I'm just kind of going by like its effect in the movie and how it affected me. And it seemed like the movie was designed to be a big blockbuster. I feel like the movie is a movie about the X-Files, and I feel like the music is music that's about the X-Files. I don't necessarily feel like I'm in the X-Files and in like the mood of it and so forth when I hear that music, and I didn't feel that way when I saw the movie. Even though I enjoyed the movie, I still think I'm watching something that's about something. And so it was kind of like, it's there's something that David Duchovny said about having the movie be bigger and louder and put David and Jillian in fancier clothes and like bigger music and so forth. And that's kind of, I guess that's sort of what I think of the music as well, which is not to knock it, but it's something that I don't know that it's distinguished from any other big orchestral score in the way that it makes me feel, even though it is an X-Files score. And I know we'll probably get to the second movie, but I would contrast that with the music from I Want to Believe, because to me that was entirely different. Like, it's not as memorable.
So Michelle, what did you think of the music of Fight the Future?
Yeah, the score, as I said, I purchased both the soundtrack and the score. The score isn't memorable. I mean, this isn't something that will ever be considered iconic. This isn't John Williams. This isn't, anything that along those scale. I don't feel that it detracted, but it really wasn't anything that pulled me in either. When I'm watching the movie, there's so many other things to be distracting, in a good way, because I think Fight the Future is a good movie. I mean, it's not the best cinematic experience I've ever had, by any stretch of the imagination, but I enjoy the movie, and I'll go back and watch it and have as much fun as I did when I saw it initially. But the music, the score isn't really a part of that. Now, the soundtrack, I played the heck out of that thing, and was looking back at it recently, and the statement I made to my husband was, this is 90s as hell. I mean, everything. You just look at the names of the people that contributed, and it screams right. 1998. Yeah, it's, I guess. But that being said, some of it is very dated, but there's some stuff on there that I would, stream now in my car. Maybe not to the extent I did in 1998 and drove my neighbors insane, I'm sure. But the soundtrack, I like the score. I don't think it's the worst film score in that it didn't pull me out of the movie, but it didn't draw me in either. It's just sort of there.
The Foo Fighters are still around.
Yeah. Foo Fighters are still around, yeah. I think Noel Gallagher is still around. Sarah McLachlan is still around, but it's kind of only on SPCA commercials or something. I'm not sure what she's doing now.
The Foo Fighters was only really in the credits, right? So there wasn't. Yeah, they weren't playing during the actual course of the movie.
I think most of the songs were not. Maybe one in the bar scene. I think the
one
song
is the Lemley's number.
Actually,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Right. But other than that, I think it was more like the inspired by the show or inspired by the movie idea, and then the credits.
So you mentioned I Want to Believe, like the second movie. I do feel like the music is quite different in that it's more subdued, but then I guess it's a different kind of movie, isn't it, with a different kind of story and in a different location. So how would you compare the music of the two movies?
First of all, I mean, I have a hard time divorcing my opinion of them, or just my affinity for the second movie from the first movie from how the music suits that, because I am sort of the rare adorer of I Want to Believe. I just think I know it's not perfect, but to me it's an almost perfect movie experience. And if I sit and watch it in my analytical brain and listen to the music in my analytical brain, I could pick it apart. But it was stunning to me, and it still is, and I've seen it a zillion times, and I'm still surprised by the music, and I'm still surprised by what comes up in the story. I don't know why that is exactly. I've thought about it for 10 years. It's just the music to me is more affecting, and it's more personal. I mean, the movie itself is more personal, obviously, but I just think that it went... there's scenes that are action. Like, I remember... This is the other thing, is that I actually remember it. I remember specifics of the music, which I didn't particularly for Fight the Future. But I remember the sequence of the helicopter landing, and I can hear the music. I can't really describe what it is. I'm not very attuned to exactly what instruments were being used and so forth. But that music, I remember the little bit of the title music at the beginning. And I remember the surgery is one of those pieces, which is the when Scully is in the operating room operating on the boy, and they play this music, and that's another one that has a vocal performance kind of woven through the instruments. And I still remember where I was sitting in the theater, and I went to the premiere, to the Hollywood premiere, and I didn't know that I was going to get to see the premiere, but I did. And so I still have that feeling of being in that theater and just this calmness, and that whole scene to me was like, it's almost like a spiritual ballet. I know you don't like the spiritual angle of it. I don't mean it in a new agey way. But there was just something that was very artistically spiritual about that. And I just think it's a beautiful piece of music, and I think it was perfectly suited for Scully in that experience, in that scene. So that's kind of the linchpin to me of the music for that movie. But overall, I really love it. I don't love is it Home Again? The music Home Again, that's the name of it. I don't love that. I feel like it's a little schmaltzy, but it's okay. But that's the one thing I would say that I don't particularly care for. And I like more of the sort of, I guess it's sort of a surfer-ish music at the end, the uncle remix of the theme, and then the song Broken. I like the way they wove that in through the credits and the end scene. So I clearly have more of a passion for that music, and I've listened to it more than I have for the music for the first film.
Michelle, how do you feel about the music for I Want to Believe?
The music from I Want to Believe is completely different, but then, as been stated, the movie is completely different. And I, too, enjoyed I Want to Believe. I think I liked Fight the Future more if I had to, pick one over the other. But I did enjoy I Want to Believe. But, again, the music of it, for me, wasn't a standout. The music in the surgery scene that Marlene was speaking of is not the same, but it's very reminiscent of Scully's theme to me. So that is one piece that definitely stands out, because it's more of that, I don't know, I guess maybe being a Scully fan, the Scully-centric scenes, and therefore the music that surrounds those, I recall more. But as a whole, the music in that film as well really was passable, I guess, is the phrase I would use for it. It wasn't bad. It wasn't, once again, to invoke John Williams, I mean, it wasn't anything that I think will ever be iconic. but not just distracting. It didn't take away from anything. I don't know that it added much either. It felt a little plug and play, I guess. We have to have something here, so at least it was still Mark Snow and it was still part of that continuity. But yeah, I mean, like I say, I can't say I disliked it, but I'm not over the moon for that one. I didn't run out and buy the score. Although in 1998 I was still so obsessed that if it just had, something X-Files-ish. Yeah, exactly. I'm all in. Sold!
So, Mark Snow has also composed other music, as we well know. He's composed music for Millennium. And Millennium is an interesting... it's got an interesting theme because it's based on a traditional Scottish ceilidh tune, which I didn't know because I have to confess, horrible confession, that I've never seen Millennium. I started watching it when I was younger and it was too scary for me. I had nightmares, so I stopped watching it and I've never gone back. I'm sure now I probably wouldn't have nightmares. I don't know. Maybe I would.
It's dark. It's very dark.
I've only... a bit creepy, I think.
Yeah, I've gone through about the first half of season 1. And I haven't finished yet. The reason I even started was because of the Time Is Now podcast that will be happening after the start of the year. And I recorded an episode for that. And so I watched the episodes leading up to the one that I was to be discussing because I felt like, okay, I should at least be somewhat knowledgeable. I'm a noob, but not completely unaware of what happened previously. And there were several instances in my notes for the episodes leading up to the one I was to discuss where I just wrote something along the lines of, this score just screams Mark Snow. Some things were even reused. But I was
really?
Yeah. So there were some things that I was so distracted by. Name that X-Files character because they used the same actors. So I was so distracted by I've seen that person before, and then 5 minutes later being like, oh, that person was the hooker that Donnie Faster killed in Irresistible. I mean, just because there's clearly something wrong with me. My husband's just looking at me like, I can't believe I married you. It was all sorts of a mess. But,
I think I did that too, probably. I didn't mention it. I mean, I saw it 20 years ago. I watched the first season when it was on. And then I saw, I think, the Darren Morgan episodes of season 2. But it rings a bell now, the picking out the characters, and so I don't know if the music guided me toward that or what happened, but I do remember thinking about, like, oh, this is like the X-Files, except it's not the X-Files, and these people have, like, weird stuff going on with their faces, so I'm probably not going to watch too much more of this, but...
But did you guys like the theme tune? Because although I didn't see the show, I did listen to the theme tune a few times in preparation for this podcast, and I have to say, I was impressed. I was impressed because it's quite a deviation from the X-Files theme tune. I mean, he's taken something that is already a tune and sort of manipulated it so that it sort of sounds creepier.
Right.
Yeah. No, I think his work there, a lot of the score to the episodes themselves are very... You can see his fingerprint on that and definitely sonically tell that, okay, this is the same guy. The theme song, if I didn't already know that this was Mark Snow and who Mark Snow is and what he had already composed, I wouldn't guess that was the same person.
I listened to it before this podcast, the theme song, just on its own, just as music, and then I listened and remembered like the intro, like the opening of the show and the visuals, and they seem very different to me. And it could be just because I didn't see Millennium as often and I haven't seen it in quite a while. But I thought like watching it with the visuals for me made it give it more tone, made it seem more like almost, I mean, darker for sure, and almost more fatalistic. And it could be like all of the things that were going on like in the visuals of the intro. But yeah, I thought it was very different than most of what I know of him is the X-Files. So I thought it was very different than that. And it wasn't just redundant, but then, like I said, I don't remember the things that he's done with the score in the actual episodes. I'll have to go back for that.
So before we go, I wanted to ask you both, have you seen the X-Files theme tune used in any other context other than the X-Files? Because I've seen it used a lot, and including people who don't watch the X-Files have sent me, memes or videos of dogs and cats looking shocked as the X-Files theme tune goes by. Or something happens and everyone's like, what? And then it's like, do, 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 do.
Yeah, okay.
Like, it's like a joke now, right? So have you guys seen that on the internet? Like, I mean, it's now becoming a cultural thing rather than just a theme tune to a TV show.
I don't know that I've seen a whole lot of it. A little bit. It's funny. My son is 12, almost 13, which is yet another thing that makes me feel absolutely elderly. But he is now at the point where he's sort of tangentially aware of the X-Files and its existence. Like, he'll come and be like, oh, what are you watching? And then he'll look, oh, okay, Mom's watching the X-Files again. Surprise. But yeah, anytime something weird happens on some video game he's playing or something he's, YouTube video meme, something he's seen, he'll start singing it in the background. So even, he's aware that anytime something weird happens, we're going to connect this to the X-Files. So I haven't run across too much of it myself, but apparently my son has.
What about you, Marlene? Do you use it like in your personal life? Like if you're driving along and you see something weird by the side of the road, do you start humming the X-Files theme tune?
I don't, because I think I'd probably have to pick something that was more situationally appropriate. I would associate that scene with like, this is just like in such and such an episode when this happened, and then pick out the specifics because like we're involved and so we know to be a little more particular. But I think of that as being like the X-Files theme song being a meme, as being similar to if it's like a TV show or just somebody in life when something odd happens, as you mentioned, they're like, oh, it must be an X-File. And then kind of like, which one? You don't know, But it's sort of, I guess it's a cultural, like general appreciation of it. And so I think of the theme song as being used in that same way, like, oh, you don't necessarily like know how to be particular about it, but it's something that's odd. And so that's the association is to the X-Files.
One of the most strange things that happened recently, well, I say strange, but we were in a hotel room, me and my husband, a year or two ago, and the lights sticking out of the wall were these sort of weird bendy lights that were like, they were literally basically torches that were on sort of, I don't know, like tubes that stuck out of the wall. The first thing my husband did was walk into the room, turn off all the lights, turn on these weird bendy tubes, and then, and like wave them about the room, and then be like, Scully, and then he started singing the theme tune. And he's not even an X-Files fan, and I was like, "Oh my god, what have I done? What's Mark Snow done? What's Clark done?" It's something in popular culture now.
Yeah, I will admit that I had the theme as a ringtone on my cell phone for a while. It's been a few years, but yes, I did that. Sorry to anyone who had to hear it.
That's cool.
I think I was the X-Files. I had the X-Files ringtone on a friend's phone. Like that was her personal ringtone for me. Was the X-Files
so when you called,
theme.
Nice.
Yeah, I had a sci-fi one on my phone that was like just eerie enough to remind me of the X-Files, which made me happy. But everybody like else was like, "Oh, that's kind of odd," But I'm like, it warms my heart to hear it.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today for this Patrons Roundtable about the music of the X-Files. It's been great to talk to you both.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed meeting both of you.
It's great.
So I don't think any of us have podcasted, or I haven't podcasted with either of you before, so that's been good.
Clara and I did the Shipper Roundtable a few weeks ago. But otherwise, it was great talking to you again, Clara, and you for the first time, Marlene.
Thank you.
And before I go, Marlene, where can we find you online?
Oh gosh, I should have realized you were going to ask this. I can never remember my Twitter handle, ever. I think that it is Marlene, so Marlene MHS, my initials. I think that's it. And then I'm also on Facebook in the basement group quite a bit. Just as Marlene Stemme, nothing extremely creative.
And Michelle, where can we find you online?
I am on Twitter at mmbaker13, and I know I say it every time, but mostly I lurk. I'm trying to get better at posting on Twitter, so anyone who wants to engage with me about random X-Files nerdness, I am all for the conversation. And I also hang out in the X-Files basement on Facebook.
And I'm Clara Cook, and you can find me on Twitter at ClaraJeanMC. You can also find us on the XCast Basement group. Please feel free to stop by and tell us what your favourite piece of music from the X-Files was, because we'd like to know. But until next time, trust no one.
The XCast, an X-Files podcast, is produced and presented by Tony Black, alongside a dedicated group of podcasters and X-Files fans. You can find us on Twitter at the XCast, and on Facebook if you type in the XCast, or at our group X-Files Basement, an XCast podcast fan group, where you can continue the discussion about all things Mulder and Scully. If you want to support the XCast further, you can now subscribe and become a patron of the show on Patreon. On Google, just type patreon.com/the XCast. That's Patreon. You'll see all of our tiers, subscription options and perks, which include early access to episodes, bonus content such as commentaries on X-Files episodes, access to a patron chat zone, and even appearing on one of our Patron Roundtable discussions. We would appreciate any support you can give the show, so just go to patreon.com/the XCast to find out more. Our title music is provided courtesy of Will A, who you can find on Twitter at IamWillAYE.